So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our keynote speaker this morning, Dr. Angie Marsh, who's the Global Clinical Program Lead, Oncology, R&D at AstraZeneca. Dr. Marsh has been working with AstraZeneca for over 10 years and has experience at the local and global levels across the oncology business unit and oncology R&D. She has held various roles within medical affairs, including medical science liaison, medical advisor, and global medical affairs lead. And she transitioned from medical affairs to oncology R&D to take on the role of senior director of study management, focused on leading global clinical operations team based out of Canada and Poland. She is currently global clinical program lead responsible for the clinical development of studies in lung cancer at AstraZeneca. Dr. Marsh will provide AstraZeneca's perspective on how they're thinking about and manifesting the future of clinical trials, including how they are developing solutions with patients. Dr. Marsh.
All right, thanks Anne-Marie, thanks Barry, thanks to the organizers for the opportunity to be here and share a little bit about AstraZeneca's perspective and some of the work that we're doing around patient-centric approaches to advance the future of clinical trials. So a little bit of background on AstraZeneca. We are focused on pushing the boundaries of science to be able to deliver life-changing medicines. Inspired by our values and what science can do, there's a strong focus around how do we accelerate delivery of life-changing medicines to be able to create some enduring value for patients. Our areas of focus are really in three main areas. The first is oncology, which is what I'll touch on a little bit more today. We also have a biopharmaceuticals group that is focused in areas such as cardiovascular, respiratory, vaccines, just to name a few. And then more recently, we've introduced a rare disease unit as well, which is really exciting and having great impact on rare diseases. Now, there has never been a more exciting time for AstraZeneca in Canada. And so earlier this year, we introduced a major expansion of our global R&D footprint in Canada. And with this, it's bringing 500 highly skilled scientific and tech jobs to the Greater Toronto area. And so this investment has really contributed to expanding our global R&D hub that is focused in oncology and biopharmaceuticals, but also creating a new rare disease R&D hub, all based in the same location in our Mississauga office. And so this has really established AstraZeneca as one of the largest R&D footprints in the Canadian biopharmaceutical industry. Now, this is really exciting because historically, a lot of our great global phase 3 clinical trials were designed and developed in the US and in Europe. And now, for the first time ever, my role is the first time we've had that role in Canada, where we have Canadians designing and developing global phase 3 trials, Canadians that understand the Canadian healthcare and that can bring a Canadian patient perspective to these global clinical trials. So we're really proud of that and really exciting about what the future is going to hold in that regard. So the focus of my presentation today is going to be to share some of the initiatives and some of the areas where we are approaching and looking towards the future of clinical trials and some of the patient-centric approaches that we've adopted. So the future is really driven by digital health and AI. And our approach is really centered in three areas, the first being patient-centric trials. How do we bring digital solutions to patients at home? The second is around improving outcomes and safety. So how do we leverage some of the latest technology to conduct remote monitoring and data collection? And the third is around how do we develop novel digital solutions to reimagine how healthcare is being provided? So what we've done is we've developed these solutions with patients. And so we've developed, and I'll speak a little bit more, an app where it's one system for the patients and the healthcare providers. And it's really looking at end-to-end from the start of a trial right through till the trial is completed and the results are starting to come through. And so what we look forward in the future is being able to utilize this app to be able to help patients identify clinical trials that would be appropriate for them. And then throughout the middle, you see throughout the conduct of the trial, helping with things like consent, being able to provide patient support and resources, materials, remote data collection, remote visits, and as I say, at the end of the trial, when they're done their participation, being able for them to still have access to study updates and ultimately the final results of the study. So another really important part of the work that we're doing is designing clinical programs with diversity at the forefront. And how do we ensure that the trials better represent and reflect the patients that these medicines will ultimately benefit? And so a couple of areas that we've recently made changes is around, for all of our oncology clinical trials, we now evaluate including adolescents and young adults to be eligible for these studies. And so we just recently opened a cervical cancer trial where we now have patients as young as 15 years old that are eligible to come into our studies. And this really helps serve an underrepresented group where historically we didn't have options, unfortunately, for these adolescents and young adults. Another area is, of course, clinical trial diversity. And how do we better include what typically have been underrepresented patient populations? So the clinical trial diversity legislation was passed last year in the US, and that now mandates, the FDA now mandates sponsors to submit a clinical trial diversity action plan with all of our new phase 3 studies that we submit. And so with that, the ask is that global, or that the sponsors be able to include an outline of how we plan to enroll underrepresented racial and ethnic populations in our clinical trials. So it's an extremely complex topic that has many challenges, but we're committed to tackling this. And we have some initiatives ongoing around data analysis and ongoing measurement, innovative solutions, and partnership and knowledge sharing in an effort to try to increase diversity and inclusion in our clinical trials. So one way to increase and diversify and create equity in terms of access to our trials is to move them away from traditional trial sites and cancer centers, which are typically located in major metropolitan areas, and move them closer to the patients, closer to home. So I want to talk a little bit about decentralized trials. I understand that was a bit of a theme coming out yesterday. So I'll bring a little bit around what's AstraZeneca's approach, what are some of the solutions we see and that we're bringing forth, and what are some of the challenges that we're faced with in the implementation of decentralized clinical trials. So the pandemic has really sparked a shift towards decentralized clinical trials. And the focus of decentralized clinical trials is really putting the patient at the forefront. So that's patient-centric and patient centricity at the forefront there. A couple of examples of the different decentralized clinical trials approaches that you can see here are, for example, at-home local labs and imaging. So we can offer an option for a patient that needs to go in to get their routine blood work on trial or some of their lab assessments. Why not offer the opportunity for those patients to be able to go to a local lab closer to home and have those tests done there, as opposed to asking them to come into the cancer center? Another one is remote monitoring and diagnostics. So how can we monitor patients remotely at home to be able to pick up on adverse events, detect them early, and prevent them from becoming more severe? And I'll focus a little bit more on that in a moment. Direct-to-patient drug distribution is a fantastic idea. Instead of having to ask the patient to come into the cancer center just to get a refill on their medication, let's ship it directly to the patients at home where possible. Telemedicine is an obvious one. And then remote consenting. Again, we're asking patients to come in to sign a consent form. Why not be able to give them that information, allow them to take it home, digest it, talk to their caregivers, family, and friends about it, and make the decision when a time is right for them, and make that decision to sign remotely on their consent to participate in a clinical trial. So all of these, as you can see, all of these different approaches sound really optimistic and really exciting, but they're not without their challenges. And that's what we're faced with right now at AstraZeneca, and in fact, across the industry, because this is something that the industry as a whole is shifting towards. I'll give a couple examples. Local labs, as I spoke about at the beginning. The challenges that is faced with is that each local lab has their local lab reference ranges. So when you get your blood work, for example, you get a value and they'll tell you if it's within range or if it's out of range. And so what we need to understand is what are the local lab reference ranges for each lab at every part of every country globally, and that presents a pretty significant challenge. And then how do we bring that in, centralize that to understand what those values are? Direct-to-patient drug distribution, as you can imagine, we have to have the right distributors, things like temperature control of medicines, and various aspects of ensuring that the medicines show up to the patients in the appropriate form that they need to, and then they're not disturbed in any way. So clinical trials exist on a spectrum from the extreme of where we were historically, of fully centralized trials where all activities were done at a cancer center, all the way to the hope and the future goal of having fully decentralized clinical trials where all the trial activities can be conducted virtually. Now, I would say where we are is starting to become more hybrid, and I think that's probably where we'll stay for a little bit. But what we're looking at is how do we adopt as many decentralization approaches as we can in our clinical trials. So every time we're designing a new clinical trial, we're looking across that sort of spectrum that I just shared to say, this is going to be appropriate, this is possible. Direct-to-patient supply, for example, is possible for oral medications. It's not possible right now for IV medications, for example. But how do we look to the future and implement some of those? So it's definitely an area that we are trying to pursue and expand the breadth and depth of what we're doing in this decentralization and overcome some of the challenges with some of these approaches, with some of the novel solutions. And the hope is to be able to reach communities and patients that we've never been able to reach before. And so Canada is a wonderful example of that, given the size of our country. If we can decentralize some of our clinical trials, imagine if we could reach northern Canada communities that we haven't been able to reach before and give those patients an opportunity to participate in clinical trials that, again, prevents them from being able to participate in just because of location and other logistical challenges. So decentralized clinical trials can offer a lot for patients in terms of reducing their burden, but ultimately it meets patients where they are. And it helps to, as we've spoke about, reduce and eliminate travel. But also the less frequent site visits can help alleviate some of the stressors that come with that around how do you manage childcare and time off work and those types of things. Of course, it improves access to trial participation and interventions on the study as well. But at the same time, for the sponsors and for the industry, decentralized clinical trials offer a more efficient and effective way to conduct clinical research. And so in the thought of diversity and inclusion, decentralized clinical trials can broaden access to patients underrepresented in traditional trials and help with bringing more diverse patient populations into our clinical trials. It also helps with accelerating timelines and improving patient retention on studies. But as we spoke about, being able to be more representative of real-world outcomes and having our results be more generalizable is really important. So I'll go into a little bit more detail on some of the digital health solutions that we've developed to enable remote patient monitoring, which is a key aspect of decentralization of our clinical trials. So I'm sure this isn't news to anybody that we are living through a digital healthcare revolution. And the vast majority of patients are interested in the use of telehealth. And we know that patient engagement is a huge challenge, and much of the dropout is due to the lack of patient-centric design. And we also know that we need to make a change for our planet with up to 5% of carbon emission coming from healthcare. So remote patient monitoring offers a pragmatic and patient-centric approach that is ensuring we're asking only the right questions, that we're asking the questions at the right time, and in the right place, which is typically the patient's home, in an effort to reduce patient burden, reduce redundant information and the redundant data that we're collecting, and enable better patient experiences. So what is remote patient monitoring? So it is a method to use technology to electronically collect, analyze, and share patient health data in real time. So it provides practical insights in the patient's health to both the patients as well as the healthcare professionals outside of inpatient interactions, and it supports enhanced patient care and measurable outcomes in health, measurable improvements in health outcomes. So if we break it down in terms of the benefits, if we're able to improve clinical insights into a patient's status and be able to detect early any adverse events that they might be experiencing, we can then risk mitigate these adverse events becoming more severe. It also improves patient engagement in that it provides them with tools and resources to help manage and self-manage their condition, and it increases access to care, providing care where they are when they need it. So let's put this into a context. If we take an example, stomatitis is a common adverse event that we unfortunately see with a lot of oncology medicines. So it causes redness and swelling in the lining of the mouth, and it creates really painful sores in the mouth that really make it difficult to eat, to drink, and to swallow. So as you can imagine, this has an incredible impact on the quality of life of a patient, and also in the ability to, or in the challenges with eating. Often what we see is that patients lose quite a significant amount of weight. And so what we've developed is a remote patient monitoring tool for stomatitis, for example, and what it does is the patient uses the app to be able to track their mouth and throat symptoms on a scale. In addition, they record their weight weekly. And so that all gets recorded into the app, and if a healthcare provider sees that there is a severe symptom that is being reported, or if they see a significant decrease in the patient's weight, they will get an email alert where they will call the patient and discuss this with them and discuss the next steps in terms of their care. In addition, at the same time, what happens is that the app will provide the patient with resources and tools to help self-manage these symptoms. So for example, in the case of stomatitis, the patients will get resources to help them to prepare the oral mouthwash that is needed and how to use that, as well as other oral care strategies so that they can try to alleviate their symptoms. And ultimately the goal, especially in the case of stomatitis, is to prevent prolongation of the adverse event, but also prevent it from increasing in severity. And unfortunately, if the symptoms are prolonged or they increase in severity, of course, what happens is there needs to be a dose reduction of the medication, a discontinuation, which we don't want to have happen if their medicine is helping to shrink their tumor or hopefully eliminate their cancer altogether. So this is a really important piece around ensuring that, again, patients' quality of life is appropriate, that we can reduce the number of adverse events, the severity, and be able to keep the patients on the medicines longer if they are in fact benefiting from those medicines. So in the development of a lot of these a lot of these digital solutions, the first thing we did was listen. And we did and conducted extensive global research with almost 600 interviews conducted with patients and caregivers to understand from them what are the moments that matter and what are the challenges that they're faced with. We also did the same with almost 500 healthcare providers and clinical research associates to hear from them about what are the challenges their patients are facing. We collected over 15,000 comments from patients and caregivers, again, around their journey and what's important for them. And this was conducted across 12 different countries. The other thing we did was evaluate clinical devices. And so we reviewed over 100 devices to find those that would be best practice to implement into our trials with the goal of supporting more decentralized clinical trials. So again, if I draw an example at the bottom center, you could see in white, those are examples of pulse oximetry devices. So another very serious adverse event, I work in the area of lung cancer, is pneumonitis and interstitial lung disease. And so we have a pulmonary remote patient monitoring solution that is available to patient that tracks, the patients track their pulmonary symptoms, but also each patient in our trial gets one of those finger clips that they're sent home with, and they measure their oxygen saturation in their blood. And again, if the results go out of range, there is an email that gets sent to their healthcare provider that can contact them immediately to discuss next steps and toxicity management guidelines for their pneumonitis or interstitial lung disease symptoms in an effort to prevent those from getting worse in severity, and in some cases, they can even be fatal. So it's really important that we're identifying these adverse events early and that we are helping to mitigate and manage the severity of these events. So in looking at all of these devices and speaking to all these patients, what we discovered is a big opportunity to collect data remotely with some of this available technology. So historically, where 90% of the data was collected from sites, we can move to a world where we have remote data collection where 70% of data can be collected at home, and this can lead to a reduction of 25% of site visits, which ultimately will help the patients. So as mentioned, we have an app that we developed within AstraZeneca, and it's called Unify. And it's one system where all of these solutions I spoke of, plus many others, is in one place. And so the patient gets an app here that enables them and all of their current clinical trial practices to be conducted by the patient remotely. So you can see there, I'm sure the text is a little bit small, but I'll give you an example. So it's got information on their visits, what to expect on their upcoming visits, when they are, et cetera. Information and articles around the clinical trial they're participating in, details related to their medication, and then you can see the example I gave you there of the finger clip for pulse oximetry. This is where, again, they put it on, it goes right to the app, and all their data is collected there. They can see their data and have access to all their data. On the other side is the healthcare provider web portal, and this is viewable on a PC or mobile, et cetera. And this allows the healthcare providers to collect the data from their patients, analyze the data, and be able to interpret the data and respond without having to see the patients in person in the office. So this app that we've developed has been rolled out in 44 countries in 82 different languages. And again, we're very encouraged by the ability for everything to be able to be in a one-stop shop for patients and healthcare providers as we roll out all of these different decentralization solutions. So as mentioned, we've been working on our digital transformation over the last few years, and we're really proud that some of the benefits have just recently been published in Nature Medicine that highlight how some of the digital solutions we've developed have provided benefit in terms of demonstrating improved patient experience, accelerated timelines, and been able to reduce cost for conducting our clinical trials. So with that, maybe I'll end with a bit more of a forward-looking approach around what's the role of artificial intelligence in clinical trials. And admittedly, we don't have all the answers for this piece yet. I think many of us have been discussing how the wealth of information and data we have now is more than we've ever had. And I think somebody recently quoted, in the last couple of years, we have more data than we've ever had. And that's not sustainable. Of course, it's making things more challenging, more complex to mine and manage all of the information that is out there. So how do we use things like AI to be able to support and go beyond what we've ever been able to do things faster, to be able to do things with more accuracy, and to be able to bring medicines to patients faster? So we're using digital technologies and AI to try to transform our company and accelerate our science and maximize our impact. So when we think about the patients, how do we advance our understanding, our disease understanding, to be able to deliver medicines quicker, deliver the treatments faster, and be able to access more patients appropriately? Our organization transforming the way we work to be able to help accelerate our science in the labs and in drug development as well. And then pioneering new modalities, manufacturing, and patient experience to change billions of lives for the better. So in using AI, the hope is to be able to decipher the wealth of information in really 5 areas. One is to gain a better understanding of the diseases that we treat. The other is to be able to identify new targets and novel medicines. So again, how do we use AI to be able to help us in the lab in our drug discovery efforts? Predicting which molecules to make and how to make them. And then better predicting clinical success when we're designing and developing these trials How can we be a better predictor of outcomes and be able to inform our designs? And then finally, pioneering new approaches in the clinic and beyond, again, with that focus of how do we do things faster and more accurate with the goal of bringing our medicines to patients. So with that, again, I will thank the organizers for the opportunity to share an AstraZeneca perspective and look forward to answering any questions.
There's 2 microphones, as I mentioned. I know Dr. Marsh is very open to taking questions.
Yeah, hello. This working? Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Very interesting presentation. I have, I guess, perhaps a nitpicky question, but my name is Raymond Vallès. I'm from CLL Canada, a group of CLL patients, chronic lymphocytic leukemia. And I was wondering, in the resources that you put in your app, do you put links to patient group websites and patient groups for the diseases that are included? Because I find one of the issues we find as patient groups is nobody refers patients to our websites. I'm just talking not just our organizations, patient organizations generally.
Yeah, no, that's a really great recommendation. To be honest, I don't think so at this time, but I have to say I haven't looked in that detail to understand. As I say, it's been rolled out in 42 different countries, but there's an opportunity in each country, right, to connect locally with those patient groups. So that's a great suggestion. Thank you.
They offer, not just information, but support services
Absolutely.
for patients, and so
Yeah.
They're very valuable.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think certainly one of the opportunities, again, as we leverage digital, is how do we connect each other better? And that's something we've talked about, right? Is as things get more complex, sometimes we stop talking and stop integrating as much as we could. And so how do we leverage some of these tools to be able to connect the different stakeholders and the different groups? There's definitely an opportunity there. Absolutely.
Thanks, Barry. That was a fantastic overview. Thanks so much. Linda Hunter, I'm also a patient partner, and really appreciated that, and fantastic idea that was just brought up too. And there are lists of many of those organizations. However, my question is, many patients are, all the stuff that you said I'd love to use for myself as a patient, and I'd be comfortable using it and everything. However, I think of my 94-year-old mother-in-law who wasn't able to use some of that stuff, wouldn't even know how to download a resource or look at it, and would probably be quite, be calling us and, oh my God, what do you do with all this stuff delivered?
Yeah.
So those are other barriers and challenges that we're all aware of too, right? So how do we be inclusive with those that aren't quite ready or don't even want to use or don't even have access, for example, either to internet or computer, especially as we do more decentralization, there's going to be more challenges in picking it up. So I'm wondering if you have partnerships with, home care nursing groups, others to offer support through overloaded, community health centers or whatever it is, other assets that actually help people that don't have family members near them to help themselves.
Yeah,
Thanks.
no, I think you raise a really good point, and it's something, of course, that we all recognize is not everybody has a smartphone readily available, or not everybody is as comfortable using it. And that's where in some cases, as you say, there's opportunity where we've interviewed not just patients, but also their caregivers as well. But there are unfortunately cases where that's not the case. And so you might have seen in that decentralization wheel, there is some home care and home support that we're piloting as well. And so where are there opportunities where there might be a need to be able to bring in some home support and home care? And so what we do is when we're designing a trial, we look across that spectrum to say, okay, what are the needs from a trial perspective? But then in each country and sort of each site, it should be a question of what are the needs of the patient, and how do we personalize this to each patient in terms of what are their specific needs, and how do we address those?
Only because we know the disgusting condition of healthcare these days, et cetera. So in those needs, if someone has healthcare, would the study trial then budget it in to ensure that the
Yes.
people that needed it have it, so that we don't have the old, there's no provider available, or there's no money, or you're on a waiting list, but you need it now because your cancer trial is going on now and you need the support now?
No, so yeah, for example, we are providing the smartphones, we are providing access to these tools for patients so that they at least have access if they choose to use them and incorporate them.
Go ahead, Stephanie.
Okay. Forgive me, I was in a meeting upstairs, and so I walked into your talk a little bit late. So you're collecting so much information using a variety of different tools. I'm just wondering, and I may have missed it, are you collecting data, information on how individuals are faring from a psychosocial point of view? And do you collect this type of information? And then if you do identify that there is distress either during or even post-clinical trial, what kind of supports do you offer? And this could be, of course, a great connection to the types of supports that could be offered by patient groups as well.
Right.
Question for you.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So the answer is yes. Included in that wheel, there is patient-reported outcomes and patient questionnaires that get at some of these topics you're raising. Right now, again, the link goes to the healthcare provider, and that's a discussion between the patient and their healthcare provider. Again, if things are starting to get to a point where, higher on the scale or issues are starting to be understood. But again, I think that's where it comes in. There's a great opportunity, not only for the healthcare provider to provide their support, but to connect them with other groups to say there are resources and support systems out there that can help you. So I think, again, being able to have that interconnected within, I think if you heard me talk about the adverse event example, there's an alert that goes to the physician, but then the app also prompts with self-care resources and tools. So in your case, why not have a notification go to the healthcare provider, but then the app say, you know what, maybe you want to reach out to, your local patient group for, these are the types of resources and support that is able to be able to help support you. So I think that's definitely where we should be looking and some of the opportunities that exist.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So Stephanie stole half of my question. That was great. I was thinking, first of all, thank you. That was a fantastic presentation and really interesting to hear the direction that AstraZeneca is going in this decentralized fashion. And it's of course something that we all as patient groups encourage and want to see more of so that more people can participate in the trials. I was thinking, however, and you started to address this in the end, that it might be a little bit lonely for the patient actually out there just having the virtual contact. And I was thinking, and coming back to Sarah's presentation yesterday on the embedding clinical trials, or how could they best inform clinical practice at the same time. So I'm glad to hear that very last part that you said you are connected with the healthcare provider at the same time. And my question is, how do you resource that healthcare provider who's not necessarily engaged normally in the clinical trial? So if we are going to embed clinical research in clinical practice, that healthcare provider has to be resourced and informed as well. That was my first question. The second one, which is a little bit easier but more challenging, is with all the data that's being collected, can that same platform be used in a subsequent patient support program that could then be shared to inform reimbursement decisions, for example, and other decisions? So the data one is a separate kind of thing. We'll start with the first.
So your first question, Barry, is it related to when I'm referring to the app and alerting their healthcare providers? Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
Yeah. So those are investigators on our trial. So those would be investigators that are resourced and reimbursed to participate in our trials in the same way that they are today. What it does, though, is it prevents some of the inpatient, in-office visits that they have to do. So some of their work gets done remotely versus in person. But it's something I've been thinking about as well as we roll this out is, does that become much more resource intensive for the healthcare provider? Yes, there's probably fewer visits in some cases, but they're just going to fill that up with other patients. And so now you also have to do your in-person visits, but also your remote as well. And how is that going to impact the healthcare providers is something that I think about as well. In terms of your second question, yes, absolutely. So the data that is being collected here then ultimately informs some of the outcomes of the trial. But also is if we spoke about some of the patient-reported outcomes and all of that, that data is critical in terms of our discussions with HTA authorities and the payers in terms of being able to seek reimbursement and health authorities as well for seeking regulatory approval. So absolutely.
Yeah, I was just thinking, but as well about the primary care physician or other
Right.
physicians who will be engaged, because they will be impacted by what's happening on the trial. When the patient is remote, and they have to go see somebody for an adverse event
Right.
or whatever. So those primary care physicians or specialists locally would actually have to be resourced as well.
Yeah.
It's sort of like an ecosystem that's going to get impacted.
Yeah, it is. Right now, the vision, as I say, is to really have it still be between investigators. And again, if they get that alert of an adverse event, then they call in via telehealth, for example, and being able to engage with the patient. Because then it becomes even more complex if we've got to train and ensure that all primary care physicians are well-versed on the trial and understand exactly the medication the patients are receiving, et cetera. So yes, absolutely. There's definitely complexity as we expand this out. If a patient is remote and needs to go see a primary care, how do we have that crosstalk and ensure that the appropriate healthcare providers are connected in the best interest of the patient?
Great. Back to Anne-Marie. Thanks.
Thank you so much for getting us started
Yeah.
in a fantastic way this morning.